Today is March 7th, 2014. I am interviewing Mr. Henry Hank Okraski, who spent 32 years in government service, 10 of which were working in the Senior Executive Service. He was the Director of Research and Engineering and the Deputy Technical Director for Naval Air Warfare Center Training Systems Division, or NOC-TSD. My name is Kendra Hazen, and with me is Amanda Hill. We are interviewing Mr. Okraski as a part of the Veterans History Project and as research for the Lone Sailor Memorial Project. We are recording this interview at the National Center for Simulation offices located in the Partnership 3 building in UCF's Research Parkway in Orlando, Florida. Mr. Okraski, will you start us off by telling us when and where you were born?
Yes, first of all, Kendra, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. You're really representing a very worthwhile cause, and I appreciate the opportunity. I was born in Utica, New York in 1936, January 22nd, actually.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about what your parents did while you were growing up?
Yes, they both worked, actually. I was a latchkey child, I think one of the first, and they worked in a florist, a wholesale florist enterprise. My mother cut flowers, my father hauled coal and manure and all sorts of things like that to keep the flowers growing. So I was pretty much on my own, had run of the neighborhood, if you will. Mm-hmm. Actually, I wasn't born on the other side of the tracks. I was born on the tracks because the railroad cars went right down the street where I lived, right next to my bedroom.
I'll bet that was a little loud.
It was like 2 in the morning. They would be bumping the cars back and forth, and it was. I got used to it after a while.
Did you grow up with brothers and sisters?
No, I was the only child. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your early education?
Yes, I was trained by nuns. I attended St. Patrick's Grammar School for 8 years. Where I learned the value of discipline and how to pay attention in class, and really experienced the nuns caring for us. They wanted us to get ahead, and I was really appreciative for that. Mm-hmm. So I went to St. Patrick's School for 8 years, and then I went to Utica Free Academy, which is the local high school in Utica, for 4 years, and graduated from there in 1953. I worked a year thereafter and then went on to Clarkson University, which is in upstate New York, in Potsdam, New York. And
during that time, did you have any members of your family who were in any of the armed services?
I had uncles. Several of my uncles were in the service. One of my uncles, John, he was at Guadalcanal. He was in the 1st Marine Corps Division. Earned three Purple Hearts while he was there. He's still alive, and I communicate with him just about every week. And I had other uncles that were there in the South Pacific and in Europe. One was in the Normandy invasion. Mm-hmm. So yes, I've come from a family. Now my father was not in the armed services. He was working on a farm under the agriculture deferment in those days.
Mm-hmm. What branches were they in? Or were they all in the same branch?
No, I had one in the Army, one in the Navy, and then one in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. And I also had another one in the Navy too, who was a deep sea diver. Yeah, with the original bubble heads where they wore the large thing, and he would repair ships in Newfoundland. Rather cold, you might say.
Yeah. Whenever you were going through Clarkson University, what was your specialty? What was your area of specialty?
Yeah, I majored in electrical engineering, and I graduated with a bachelor's in electrical engineering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then from there, what was your first professional experience?
Yes, I was recruited from college to Link Aviation. Link Aviation was located in Binghamton, New York. And they were manufacturers of simulators, primarily flight simulators at the time. And I always had somewhat of an interest in flight simulators. I might relate to you the first simulator that I ever had. Mm-hmm. Okay. I was 11 years old, and I would spend summers on the farm. And all we had was radio for entertainment. There was no television, or we didn't have any movies or anything close by. So radio was the big thing. every day I would listen to Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy. And they had one offering there that if you sent, I think it was 15 cents and a box top from Wheaties, they would send you a simulator. So I got the money, I got the Wheaties, I put them together, send it off. And I waited and waited. Every time the rural post delivery man would come by, he'd say, "No, Sonny, not today." And nuts, I'd go back, and every day I'd wait for it. Finally it came. And I opened it up, and it was a cardboard instrument panel that replicated an aircraft cockpit. It had a control stick, it had a throttle, and it had 2 rudder pedals, simulating the aircraft. So what we did, all of us youngsters, part of the Jack Armstrong squadron, we would sit in our chairs, set up our cockpits, and then listen to the radio. And he would say, "Today we're going to be flying over the jungles of South America. Look down, you can see the river." I would look down and I could see that river. Because in those days we said radio was the theater of the mind. And it really was. We used our imaginations and we could visualize things that weren't even there. So that was my first simulator. That whetted my appetite. So then when Link Aviation recruited me, I was very happy because I would be working with simulators again.
What exactly were your responsibilities when you were at Link Aviator?
Yes, with Link, they started us out in the field service organization. So I attended a short course learning how to maintain and operate one of their flight simulators. They called it a C-11 or Device 2F-23 in those days. And it was a basic one-seater flight instrument trainer that was used in primary flight training for the Air Force in my case, and where pilots would learn how to fly instruments, how to do instrument landing, also how to react to various failures that might occur in the aircraft. So I would help the pilots learn how to go through emergency procedures to save themselves and save the aircraft. So that was my first job. It entailed traveling throughout the Southwest, and that was in Oklahoma, Texas, in that area where there are several Air Force bases that I had an opportunity to visit and work with the various pilots or wannabe pilots in those days. Mm-hmm. So that was my first job, Kendra.
How long were you there? How long were you with Link Aviation?
Well, I was with Link Aviation for about 4.5 years. Mm-hmm. What happened was I did a short stint in the Army. I had to go through basic training, but I essentially went back into the inactive reserves. And then Link transferred me to a number of places, but the most memorable one, I guess, was to Thule, Greenland, where I spent 6 months one night. It was dark for the entire period. And I was working then on the F-102 aircraft simulator. And so I would help train the pilots, set up all the simulations and train the pilots to do air-to-air combat maneuvering and air-to-air intercepts. And it was very, very important because it was co-located with the ballistic missile early warning site located there at Thule, Greenland, whose antenna was essentially affixed at the Soviet Union at that time because we were under Cold War conditions. So having our pilots trained was very important in the event that anything should happen and they had to scramble. They were in a position to perform as they were trained.
Do you remember what year that was when you?
It was about 1960. Mm-hmm.
And then after your 4.5 years with Links, where did you go next?
Yeah, I traveled a little bit more with Link, and then I took a job with the Naval Training Device Center, which is located in Port Washington, Long Island. And that's where I took a position as a GS-11 electrical engineer working in the field support of naval aviation simulators. It was at a facility that was called the Guggenheim Estate at one time. It was a castle. Actually, it was a castle that was created by the Guggenheims and the Gould family years before. So it was quite a thrill to come to work and go into the castle. And it was on an estate that overlooked Long Island Sound and several acres. It was beautiful. And our next door neighbor, who Kendra, you may not recall, was somebody called Perry Como, the singer, Perry Como. So he lived next door, very casual individual, and we would wave as we went out to work in our castle.
A castle. what kinds of things were the projects that were being worked on? In addition to what you did, what are some of the different projects that were being worked on there?
It was an interesting time because originally the Naval Training Device Center, which began as the Special Devices Desk by Admiral de Flores in 1941, expanded its mission to include more than just aviation training. In the beginning, he focused on flight simulators, and the Link Trainer actually grew out of some of the initiatives that were, were going on there. And Louis de Flores took the Link Trainer and modified it for gunnery training and other applications that went beyond aviation. They began to get into the surface navy, land warfare, undersea warfare, simulators for all those kinds of things. But the primary thrust was in aviation. So aircraft such as the P-2V and the F-3 and the A-7, the A-3 Intruder, all those aircraft had simulators that were built and delivered and being used by the pilots and aircrew to train out in the field.
And how long were you there in Long Island with them?
Yeah, I was there until 1965. 1965, well, let me back up about 6 months from there earlier. I had bought a house. My wife and I bought a house out in Northport. And it was a really, really nice house. It was about all we could afford, too. But it was near the water, and it was a beautiful place. 6 months later, the commanding officer gets on the loudspeaker and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, your next home will be in Orlando, Florida." I said, "What? Next home? I already have a home." But nevertheless, we did move to Orlando, Florida. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to us at the time. It was the beginning of a tremendous growth of simulation and a wonderful career opportunity for me and my friends and coworkers that moved here, and also a wonderful environment for my family to live and grow.
Did you know anything about the area before you got down here?
No, but they allowed us 2 visits, and at that time, in 1965, Orlando was a sleepy little town in the orange groves. We had Gatorland, I think, and then Cypress Gardens. There was no Disney, there was no SeaWorld, Universal, et cetera. It was a sleepy little town, and it was very enjoyable to go out on Sundays and look at homes for sale, and take in some of the natural beauties, some of the, like the Wekiva Springs, which was open to the public, and there were other springs, Silver Springs, et cetera. And the beaches were so close. So it was very, very nice, very unspoiled, you might say.
And when you moved down, was it called the National Center for Simulation?
No, that's a whole nother outgrowth. Yeah, the Naval Training Device Center changed its name about 2 or 3 times to where it is today, Naval Air Warfare Systems Training System Division. So we went through an evolution to get there.
When you moved down, what was it?
It was still the Naval Training Device Center at that time.
And what resources was here for them?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Well, the only thing that was here, and this is kind of amusing, you wonder how these things happen, these relocations, because we're always faced with things like BRAC and the justifying movements and what have you. But the truth to be known, a lot of these decisions are totally politically based. And what happened was an Air Force activity moved out of the Air Force base here in Orlando. Not McCoy, but where Baldwin Park is today. Okay, there was an Air Force reconnaissance squadron located there. They were relocated, and I think part of it was even disestablished. So there was a need to fill the vacuum. Well, the political powers to be got together and decided that this little activity up in Port Washington, Long Island, would feel much better if they were located in Florida. So they moved us to Orlando beginning in 1965. Many of the buildings were old barracks buildings. They were non-air conditioned. We lived in that kind of a situation where this was before computers where you did your own memos and that. So we would draft memos, pen and ink, and your sweat would drip on the paper and run as you're trying to write memos to for business purposes. So it was a rather primitive existence. Although once the Navy got there, they began to refurbish the buildings, and we got air conditioning, and which worked most of the time. So that made us a lot more comfortable. But an interesting thing about Orlando, too, from a historical standpoint, when the Normandy invasion was being planned, General Eisenhower came to Orlando and actually mocked up the Normandy beach in one of the orange groves. In other words, he created an emulation, if you will, of the Normandy beachhead. And he would position ships and whatever on this false floor that essentially was cement, looking like the Normandy beachhead. And he would, with his generals, plan their attack, moving objects around and developing strategies that they would follow. So that was in Orlando long before the Navy or anybody else got down here talking about simulation.
Right.
And can I give you one more historical event? I think the year was like about 1935 or so. I have to verify that, but Louis de Flores, for whom the building is named out here, the Navy building is the Flores Complex, the Louis de Flores building. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, he got simulation off the ground, particularly for the Navy, beginning in Washington, D.C. But before that, he was involved in oil production, the cracking process and all that. Well, he was honored for his accomplishments, and he was a civilian now at that time, by a number of people, one of which was Rollins College here in Winter Park. So he was given an honorary doctorate degree from Rollins College the same year that Marjorie Kennan Rollins, spelled differently, who, as you well know, the author of The Yearling and Cross Creek and a few other wonderful novels. So that brought simulation down here, again, back in the 30s. If you believe in predestiny or something, you begin to wonder if there isn't some connection. So those are a couple other historical points relating to the Orlando area, having to do with simulation.
Sure. And kind of the birth of the idea of it being here and being located here.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about what was here when you got here and the buildings. Can you tell us a little bit about those early days? What were kind of your primary responsibilities when you first got down here? What were some of the main projects that were being worked on?
Sure. When I came down, I was assigned to the Maintenance Engineering Division. And it doesn't have to do with changing light bulbs or anything like that. What we actually had to do was plan for the logistic support of the simulators, because it's very critical to keep the simulators operating when they're being used by our pilots, air crew, and other ship's crew, etc. So we had to make sure that they were reliable, maintainable, and that we provided an adequate logistic support package to go with each and every simulator that went out the door. And our industry was pretty much on board when it came to designing in reliability, maintainability, and providing a good logistic support package. So one of my jobs was to develop the criteria for logistic support, and I wrote a document called Bulletin 40-1, which identified all the logistic support requirements for simulators that stayed in use for probably 20 years or so, that people may even use parts of it today. But it was important to do that. Now, in the process of moving down here, a number of people didn't want to leave Long Island. Mm-hmm. They were really happy just to stay there. And I, in turn, I was offered a job with the space program at the time too, but I elected to come to Florida and stay with our parent organization anyway. So when a number of people didn't come, it left some room at the top. So that gave me some nice promotion opportunities that I took advantage of. And so going, from a division head to department head to associate director, et cetera, I think the move down here kind of enabled that progression quite nicely. So what I did is I had a division, and we worked very closely with the engineers in designing our systems such that they were maintainable and supportable. And the program began to grow quite a bit. Word got around that, hey, this simulation stuff must be pretty good. It must be saving a lot of lives and it's not costing as much as putting airplanes in the air, or ships at sea, or submarines under the sea. So the Army, well, they had joined us earlier as what was called the Army Participation Group, and simulation caught on with them, and they began to grow very large. Then the Marine Corps, they came on board. Then later the Air Force came on board. So what was just a single entity down here, the Navy, became pretty much a joint operation, joint with a small j, not a large j, because we're not really a joint organization. We operate jointly though, and it was amazing of the synergy that was achieved by working together. You know, an engineer working on a tank simulator, working alongside an engineer working on an aircraft simulator, could share technology and experiences and know-how, such that the customers were getting more for their money essentially than if an individual service were doing the procurement of a simulator. And that continues today, maybe even more so today because of the large the large acquisition program that they have here at the what we call now Team Orlando.
After it was called the Naval Training Device Center here, what was then the next step?
Well, it was renamed Naval Training Systems Center, Naval Training Materials Center, and Naval Training Systems Center, and then it went to Naval Air Warfare Center. So, well, the reason for that is that we changed responsibilities. We changed the organizations that we reported to over the years. In the beginning, you know, it was like a Bureau of Aeronautics, and then it was the Chief of Naval Research, then it went to Chief of Naval Material, and then to the Naval Air Systems Command, then away and then back again. So every time it moved, people thought, well, we ought to change the name of it. So that happened, you know, over several years. So the stationary was taking a hit, you know, in changing our names and who we reported to over the years. But it appears now that we have a very stable organization under the Naval Air Systems Command, and our organization continues to grow down here, and they're doing wonderful things, saving time, lives, and money every day. See, that's the beauty of really working with an organization like this, because when you go home at night, you realize that you touch the lives of every soldier, sailor, Marine, and Coast Guardsman, you know, and through the efforts of what you're doing here. And you can't beat that for, you know, job satisfaction.
Can you give us some specific examples of simulations that happen? Like, what does it look like? How does that work? What kinds of things do you have to do on the front end to make it possible?
Yes. I'm not going to do that. It's all in here. That was a commercial message. Sorry. No, actually, kidding aside, it all begins with the requirements. It all begins with the requirements from the parent system. Like if it's an aircraft that you want to build a simulator for, you examine the aircraft, you examine the tasks that have to be conducted by the aircrew, and given those tasks, then you can select the media. What media is best to teach, train those particular tasks? There are some that deal with like decision making, others are procedural, and each and every media kind of has their own strength, you know, with each of the tasks that have been identified. So normally you go through some form of task analysis of the operational system, and then from there you come up with the media. You identify the behavioral objectives, come up with the media, and then go about writing the specifications and statements of work for the training system that you intend to have procured or built. So our engineers spend a lot of time writing specifications, statements of work, delineating exactly what this simulator has to look like. Let's take, for example, what would a flight simulator consist of? Okay, first of all, you've got the enclosure where the pilot would sit. So you've got to make sure that all the instruments and all the knobs and controls, whatever, operate just like the real airplane. So you have to make some decisions, how you're going to design that, and it becomes a systems engineering process to do that. So you design that enclosure with the proper configurations. Then you decide, well, am I going to have a visual display out so that the pilot can look out the windscreen and see the real world? If so, there are several choices you have as to what kind of a visual system you'll put on this. So let's say you narrow it down to the visual system. Maybe it's a wide screen. The pilot looks out and can look 180 degrees perhaps and see, even through the periphery, what's happening in the real world. And the intent is to have it move and behave just like it would if you were flying the aircraft. Okay, what else do we need? Well, we need some computers to make this thing work. So you get a computing system. You go through that whole exercise again. What's the proper size and speed, etc., for the computer? Then you say, well, should we have motion or not? Shall we tilt and move this pilot? You go through that same process, come up with a motion system. Then you have things we call like control loading, in that like when the pilot moves the control stick, does it feel right? Does it feel like the airplane? Is it hydraulic or is it force fed or whatever? You make these kinds of decisions depending upon what the requirements are. So what you do is you take all these components and you integrate them together, and you come up with a training system that replicates the function, the functions, and usually the configuration of the system that you're trying to simulate. I mean, a true testimony to how well we've done our job is when a pilot comes out of the simulator and he or she is draped with sweat and they say, that was god-awful. And then you know you've achieved some realism. Because what we're looking for here, and I think the amusement people say it very nicely, is we're suspending disbelief for a little while. Because you know you're in a simulator, but if you get all engrossed in the task at hand, you can forget that it's a simulator. You begin to think that it's real. And that's what we want, because then you can train people effectively. They can make decisions under stress, even though you've created the stress artificially. So that's kind of how you put it. That's what a flight simulator would look like. Then you have all sorts of other simulators. Besides just aviation, the submarines, you might want to teach people how to control a submarine with the driving aspects of it, or the weapon system piece and fire control, etc. All those have to be integrated into the overall system. There are full-up systems, there are part task trainers, entire families of training devices.
Thank you.
I'm giving you a crash course here in a very short period of time, but
that's perfect.
Okay.
That's exactly what I was hoping for. I think you touched a little bit on this next question, just through some of those examples that you said, but what is the mission and mission statement of NOC-TSD?
Well, see, I've been out of there now for a while,
Mm-hmm.
because I retired in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
But the mission is, and I can just sort of paraphrase, I believe it is to be the principal agent for the acquisition, research, and logistic support of training simulators for the Navy and the other services as assigned. Something to that effect. But they are the principal activity within the Navy for procuring simulators.
And you've answered a lot of my questions. Thank you. Can you tell me a little bit about your time at NOC-TSD? What were some of your major projects, and
Sure.
what happened on your watch when you were here?
Yeah, I'd love to, because we have a road of accomplishment, I think, over those years while I was here, that I'm quite proud of the people that were able to make some real breakthroughs in technology and be able to satisfy the warfighter and the warrior in a manner that hadn't been done before. I'll give you one example. The MILE system, which is the Multiple Integrated Laser Engagement System, was essentially developed in our laboratory at NOC-TSD by a team. The team was headed by a gentleman by the name of Al Marshall. Al Marshall had a better idea on how to teach weapons team engagement, and that was to use lasers. eye safe and totally safe lasers as opposed to using live ammunition out in the field. So he came up with the whole concept of outfitting the soldiers with the laser detectors. And this was really the first laser tag, if you will, but it was for the military. He was a Navy engineer doing some work for the Army, and the Marine Corps went and bought the mile system also. So it was a tri-service initiative kicked off by one little team, if you will, working in our laboratory under the Office of Naval Research task. Some other things that we did, other than just the technology growth and the improvement in the fidelity of simulation. Visual systems have gotten to be very, very good when it comes to realism, as is motion for that matter. Now, while I was there too, we toyed with the idea of developing deployable trainers. We thought, well, gee, why do we always have to bring people into the schoolhouse, put them in a simulator, and then they get deployed out to sea, and by the time they come back, some of those skills have already perished. I mean, they're perishable skills to some degree. Why not put the trainers out there where they are? So along came the whole idea of deployable simulators and mission rehearsal simulators that could be deployed, put on board aircraft carriers, or at other installations that are closer to the squadrons and the people that actually use them. So the deployable simulators, I thought, was a really neat technology that was like the next energy level above what we had been doing in the past. And the same is true in so many other areas too, where the level of realism has increased tremendously. For example, this happened after my watch, though. The Battle Stations 21, the simulator up at Great Lakes, where they brought together the entertainment world along with the military simulation world. They built a training device for recruits, Navy recruits, that essentially forms the part of their graduation, if you will, their last day. It's sort of like a hell week, but only compressed into one day, where they're able to simulate fires on board ship, casualties, injured people, leaks in the bulkhead, all simulated, but like with real water and what looks to be like flames. Again, borrowing on the Disney magic and the other theme parks that are here, and it became so. It's so realistic, in fact, that it's hard to replicate what they've done up there. Another thing that we did way back when, or back in the day, as they say today, is pierside training. Along the same notion of, why bring people in to a classroom, or why go to sea and train all the time, because that can be expensive. We came up with the pierside trainers, which essentially are, they're trailer-based simulations, more like stimulators than simulators. But anyway, we take these trailers and we plug them into a ship that's tied up pierside. And through cables and running alongside and into the ship, we're able to generate signals, put them into the ship, so that the people that are at their operating stations see everything as though they are out at sea. We can create targets in that trailer, create targets and threats, and then the people in their battle station, or in their normal working stations, they can look at their radars or sonars or fire control, and they see targets like they're at sea, and they give commands and they run through the exercise as though they were out at sea. So that was the family of pierside trainers that turned to be quite successful. And then the next step was embedded training, where we were able to embed some training features into the actual parent system, whether it be an aircraft or a ship. I know one particular radar, for example, that when they go out at sea, they can generate targets and practice, radar movements, simulating those targets that are out there. There are no targets in the water, but the ship's crew think that there is, because we can generate those, and they look at their scopes and whatever, and they see actual targets that aren't real. So, this happened outside, though, of my experience at NOC-TSD, but it began at NOC-TSD, and that's the whole notion of using virtual reality for training. one of the things that Dr. Bob Hayes had a project with his team called V-Sub, to where they simulated the gentleman in the submarine at the conning tower that was steering a submarine through a canal or channel, say. And they did that through a virtual reality. They would put the head-mounted display on the individual, and that individual would see the banks of the canal, would see other ships, beacons, markers, and then through a headset communicate with what would have been the people steering the submarine, when in actuality it was a voice recognition system that was taking action based on the commands being given by the individual. So that was a very, very neat program. And later on, after I retired, and I worked with a company, General Dynamics, actually, Veridian at the time. I was like a support contractor to them. Came up with this notion of maybe we can do something for deaf and hearing impaired kids using that same technology. At that time, Congressman McCollum was very active and interested in what we're doing, and he was able to get some support money for us to build a virtual reality system for Lake Sibylla Elementary School up in Maitland. There they have a high percentage of deaf and hearing impaired children, and what initiated this was the principal coming to one of our NCS meetings. And at the time, I believe I was chairman of the board of NCS. And we got all through with our meeting, and it was an open meeting, and he raised his hand and said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I'm the principal of Lake Sibylla Elementary School." He said, "What can you do to help us?" So, what's your problem, sir? And he says, "Here's my problem. We have a large group of deaf and hearing impaired kids, and our teachers spend most of their time with living skills, teaching them how to do very simple things. They don't have time to get into reading and arithmetic and things they're supposed to be learning. What can you do to help us?" So we moved out, and we got all the support we could. We put together a team, we got some money, and we did build a virtual reality system, and the kids loved it because they would get immersed in the system. And we simulated, for example, the question of how to cross a street safely. So we would simulate trucks going by so they could see them, and we even had the odor of diesel so that they knew it was a truck, and a little bit of rumble because we fixed the seat so it would vibrate. And so they learned to go to the crosswalk and go through the green light and whatever. We had stranger danger, danger stranger, with an intruder coming on the school grounds, and we taught them what to do if they saw a stranger that didn't look good. We taught them how to go to an order in a fast food restaurant. Many times these kids, they're not looking for recognition, they're not looking for attention. So if they order the wrong thing, usually they'll just take it and eat it, whatever it is. Or if they get the wrong change back, they're not going to make a thing out of it. They don't want to, by and large, don't want to be recognized like that. So we taught them how to go into a fast food restaurant and order. We gave them the menu, we told them how to order, they made change, and we gave it back to them, whatever. We did that. We did fire in the home, how to get out of the building if it's on fire, etc. So we taught them all those things using that technology of virtual reality. And to me, that was probably one of the most rewarding projects that I ever got involved with.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Fun too. Mm-hmm. Like I tell people, I never worked a day in my life. And that's true. If you enjoy what you're doing, you never will work a day in your life.
Mm-hmm. One of my questions is about challenges in creating the different simulations for, I guess it's kind of a broad question though, but what are some kind of reoccurring challenges that you come into when you go to put together one of these simulations?
Well, of course, we always think in terms of cost and schedule and performance. And cost is always an issue, particularly if you're dealing in an area where you cannot define precisely exactly what you want. Mm-hmm. And so there's opportunities there for some movement within a feasible window of opportunity. So many times cost growth is an issue. trying to keep the cost within the budget. And the same is true with time. Technology changes so rapidly, and usually you want the most current technology in your system. So there might be some delays attributed to that, and then when you get to new technology, then there's a learning curve or whatever. So time can be a problem. And performance can be an issue too, because you really have to understand what the user wants. And it can be sometimes vaguely stated, and our engineers and others, our education specialists and psychologists, will write a specification, and it may not be exactly what the expectations of the eventual user. And then you have turnover of personnel. The user has different people coming on board because of rotation. And the new person might say, gee, that's nice, but here's what I really want. And so that can drive cost and schedule a little wacko too. So those are some challenges. And the technology itself, you do want to have everything that is current as it can be, because you've got that whole issue of user acceptance to deal with. Kids today have the latest bells and whistles, and it's true in the service too. I mean, all the younger people coming in the service usually are familiar with and have used the latest technology. So if you come along and give them something that's lesser than that, they're not going to be happy, and chances are they may not even use it. So you've got to be very accommodating to the generations as they're coming along to what you deliver. I'll give you a good example of that. Today, gaming. We're using gaming technology in some of the simulator developments, like in the decision making and some of those training devices. They're actually using off-the-shelf games, or it can be just the gaming engines that are being used in the simulations. So we have a whole new generation now that they're familiar with gaming, but we have others that are not familiar with gaming. So we've got to bring the new people in as quickly as we can to make sure that we're satisfying the generational needs of our service people. So keeping up with the technology and incorporating that in our latest devices is going to be a challenge. So there are a few challenges. There are other challenges, I'm sure, but those are a few.
Thank you. And even in that answer, you talked a little bit about this next question. Can you tell me what you think the future looks like for simulation, specifically here at NOC-TSD? What does the future look like with what kinds of things they might get into?
Yeah, these are exciting times, because every time I think that we're here now, it just goes off onto another curve. I liken this to growth curves that I have been developed for other things, like tennis rackets. Tennis rackets, started out as wood rackets, and then they went to aluminum rackets, then they went to composite rackets. And every time they go from one technology to another, you get off a growth curve that looks like it's saturated onto a new growth curve that begins to get saturated, and you continue to do that. And that's where we are right now in simulation and training. With, as I mentioned, gaming, for example, it's opening up a whole new area for us to investigate. An area, too, that I think is going to get some attention, and that is the fidelity of simulation is determined by brain activity. To be able to measure brain activity in an individual while varying fidelity might give us some indication as to how well we are conveying information to the trainee based on their mental arousal or other symptoms that would be evident through brainwave measurement. For example, we might take a look at a low fidelity simulator as opposed to a high fidelity simulator, and as opposed to an aircraft, and do the same measurement on individuals and just take a look at what kind of distraction or what kind of concentration takes place in each of those situations. So I think you're going to see more activity in the brain measurement area. I'm not up to the point yet where they're going to put probes into the head, and then with one throw of the switch, you've got it. That's maybe for my son or somebody else to pick up on that. But Yeah, I think that's a very, very good area too. And people are doing that now to some degree. Not full scale yet, but they are looking at it. Other areas, I mentioned gaming. I think being able to tell a story better, being able to tell the story of how the simulator is included in the overall scenario or experience that you're trying to create. The attractions do that really well. They prepare you for it. You know, the Tower of Terror, right? You're terrorized before anything happens, for that matter. Or if you go to the Cape over here where they have the new Atlantis, and you go through the space mission, they get you all prepped for the mission that you're going to be involved with. They know how to tell a story, and I think we need to do that too with our training for our military personnel, is to be able to integrate what we're doing more into the overall scenario that we're trying to establish. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And one of my last questions is about the changes that have happened in Orlando because of TSD's presence. You kind of described for us what it was a little bit like when the simulation, kind of got started here. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's changed, how Orlando has changed because of TSD specifically's presence here?
Yeah, I think we need to look at it from a little larger picture first, and that is when we first came down here, there were no companies except for Lockheed Martin that had anything to do with simulation. But then as simulation began to grow, all these other companies began to come down and wanted to be close to the acquisition agencies, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard to some degree too. They wanted to be close to it, so they began to orbit essentially the Team Orlando organization that we've been talking about, to where Team Orlando now accounts for billions of dollars of acquisition of simulators. And this accounts for some 27,000 direct employees working with the Defense Department in modeling and simulation. But now it's spread. We're no longer just defense. We're into entertainment, homeland security, transportation, medical, all using simulation. And we don't know how large that piece is, but if the other piece is 27,000, it's equal to or greater than probably. So what went from a handful of people moving down here in 1965, we might have 50,000 people now involved in simulation one way or another. Tremendous impact on the tax base in Central Florida. The average salary is about $70,000 a year, people working in the simulation industry. And the educational system has been totally responsive. University of Central Florida, what were our community colleges now are four-year colleges that have been set up. We can get a master's or a doctorate degree in simulation through UCF. Our high schools now, we have a curriculum in modeling and simulation that NCS put together. It's on our website. There just seems to be no end to this, and that's good. You know where the long pole in the tent is to all this? Teachers. We don't have teachers that can teach at the K through 12 level modeling and simulation and let the kids know about the careers that are available and why they need to study STEM, because that's the basis for our business in modeling and simulation is STEM. But it is grown almost exponentially, and I expect it to continue to grow too, in spite of cutbacks or other barriers that we might see. We're in a growth community right now.
Do you have any other thoughts, kind of wrapping up our interview? Any final thoughts about simulation and its benefits, how it benefits us?
Well, we know about the military. We also know that it's being infused now into the medical world. Our Lake Nona complex down here in Medical City has a number of simulations for like endoscopic, other types of surgery, the Da Vinci simulations and all. The VA hospital, they all have some form of simulation. So the spectrum has opened up as to the applications of simulations.
Mhm.
It provides for a wonderful career for individuals that want to get into a well-paying, yet very, very satisfying career. And we need to really get that out, get that information out to the youngsters so they do begin to think of it as a viable career. And they can stay in Florida, you know, and enjoy what we have here in doing so.
Thank you.
My pleasure, Kendra. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah.